And this is the Chris Heasley Show. And on this show, we will give you all of the ideas, the content, the information that you need to take back your country. But in order to take back your country, you have to start at the local level first. And that means starting at the city level, at the state level, at the county level, at the village, the township, and the borough level. It is up to you to take back your country, and you do it with local activism, because with local activism, you get the biggest bang for your buck. For some reason, our federal authorities, they are somehow insulated from our activism, but at the local level, they are totally vulnerable. So start going to your county commissioner meetings, start going to your city council meetings, start going to your school board meetings and making a difference. And this is the Chris Heasley Show. And on today's show, we have a very special guest. We have Carrie Bigford of Texans for Vaccine Choice. And Carrie has fought the good fight. She's fighting on behalf of your interests, on behalf of your ability to maintain autonomy over your own body, but also to maintain the ability to decide what happens to your children, the fate of your children. That's what her purpose is. And with that being said, Carrie, it's very good to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Good. Well, thank you very much for coming. I do appreciate it.
Likewise.
So I gave a pretty robust opening monologue there.
Yeah.
And can you just tell me what you think of it? Do you think I'm spot on? Do you think I'm missing the point? Or tell me what you think.
I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of the devastation after the COVID-19 vaccines. But I want to point out that as all vaccines, and particularly the COVID vaccines, all vaccine recipients are the most legally and physically vulnerable person in the process. You, as a vaccine recipient, own 100% of the legal and physical risk if there is an adverse event, which all pharmaceutical interventions, including vaccination, has adverse events.
So, the one thing I want to say is that if somebody comes to you and tells you that they're giving you a medicine, but in fact it is a poison. Okay, they're telling you that it is a medicine, but in fact it is a poison, and they have no liability for the consequences of their actions. Why wouldn't they do it? Why wouldn't they do it? There's no consequences.
Yes, that is a problem, and it was a problem in the 80s, even when Reagan passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, which is what gave vaccine manufacturers and administrators such blanket liability protection for the harms caused due to their vaccines. And our government was supposed to do some certain steps of having a biannual task force try and find safer adjuvants to prevent vaccine injury, to determine what susceptible population was more likely to become vaccine injured, and to find adjuvants that are in the vaccines to not have those people have those same adverse events. And they didn't do that. They haven't done that once. They never formed the Vaccine Safety Task Force. They never reported to Congress. They have made zero effort to find safer adjuvants.
So in spite of the measures taken under the Reagan administration, these vaccine makers, they have full reign to do. It's the wild, wild west in their world. They can do any type of harm that they want to us, and they are fully protected by the establishment class.
It's very important as a potential vaccine recipient to understand that you, as a vaccine recipient, own 100% of the legal and physical risk. You are the one who owns that.
Carrie, it's funny that you say that. I didn't hear Rodney Ellis mention that.
Yeah.
Did you hear Rodney Ellis mention that?
No.
Yeah. I didn't hear Rodney Ellis mention that. And I like to present the question. Let's think about the stature of pharmaceutical companies and how to what extent they've infested our government to at a point where Carrie's pointing out things at the federal level, but I'm pointing out things at the local level. Their tentacles have creeped down to your local county officials.
Absolutely. And the misinformation that goes along with that, they don't tell people that you own all the physical and legal risk when you are a vaccine recipient. They are not legally required to disclose all of the risk that you're undertaking as a vaccine recipient. The FDA itself classifies vaccines differently than pharmaceutical drugs. So people often say about how the United States has an incredible gold standard of double-blind, randomized controlled trial safety testing for pharmaceuticals. They're all longitudinal. The average safety testing trial for a drug is over 4 years. For vaccines, none of that exists. They are a biologic. They do not have to have an inert placebo, which means they can use an active control. It's not saline or a sugar pill like the pharmaceutical drugs. There are no minimums for trial participant levels. So like Botox, for example, was a common cosmetic drug that had a trial that lasted for 52 weeks and had over 40,000 participants. Whereas hepatitis B, a vaccine recommended for babies in the first 12 hours of life, had 147 children for 4 or 5 days, depending on your manufacturer of choice, whether it was Merck or GlaxoSmithKline. So they don't have a minimum of trial participants. They don't have a minimum length of time for where they have to test that for safety. So hepatitis B, 4 days or 5 days, depending on the manufacturer. The inactive poliovirus, IPV, had 72 hours of safety testing. 72 hours, that's it. And as a vaccine recipient, it's really important to understand that you need to do your due diligence because you are the one responsible in case anything goes sideways. There isn't a recourse. Like we found out, that Johnson & Johnson knew that all the baby powder had lead in it for 4 decades through a lawsuit process with discovery. That is not available to a vaccine-injured person.
So I want to say to the listening audience, we've had some difficulties since the storm, and we've been working to get the station back up. And so we're sort of having a little bit of a wrestling match in this studio right now, making sure all the buttons and the dials are working. But I think that we might have a caller, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn up one dial. Again, I might be totally missing the mark here. Do we have a caller on the line?
You do.
Okay, we do. Hold on a second here. Let's see. Are you there, caller?
I am.
I cannot hear anything on my headset. Can you hear?
I can hear.
Okay, I cannot. And there's something up with my headset. I don't know what the deal is. So
Well, it is
I cannot. I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'll let the caller ask Carrie one question. I can't be a part of it. And then if it's okay, I'll let the caller go because unfortunately I'm simply not able to hear this conversation. Go ahead, please. One question, caller.
What's your question?
Well, actually, I didn't have a question. I was calling in as I normally do during this show. Just let Chris know this is G2.
It's G2.
Yeah.
And so my comment is simply what you're saying is really important, and it is astonishing that we've gotten to where we are.
Yes.
When you think about the trial information that you just laid out,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that that's what's going on, of course, indicates that a lot of people inside the medical establishment know exactly what they're doing. It's not as if they simply think that a 72-hour trial is acceptable or that 147 children is a suitable sample size. So what you're indicating with what you're saying is that this is really a widespread conspiracy to get untested materials injected into children, infants, in their very first hours of life. And this is really an indictment of the entire medical establishment because they all know. Anyone assuming that they don't know, that the hospital administrators don't know, or that the doctors that are administering these don't know, you've got to really be extraordinarily generous to believe that these people who hold themselves out as experts are doing this and are simply ignorant of the implications of what they're doing.
Yes, I mean, that's a very astute comment. But really, the issue for vaccines in particular is the regulatory capture issue, as you described, is a huge problem. The pharmaceutical companies do have complete and total blanket liability, and every single vaccine manufacturer, there's 4 or 5 major ones, every single one of them has been convicted of criminal fraud. And it is literally the same companies doing that, and the reason that we knew that they committed fraud in those other trials is because they had legal liability, and we could go through the legal system through class action lawsuits and seek recompense for those injured people. But with vaccines, that does not exist. It is now the biggest cash cow in the pharmaceutical industry. Pfizer in 2021 alone made over $39 billion on the COVID vaccine. They have not had to pay out a single dime in injuries or any vaccine injury since the 1986 law passed. Our government has been paying for those injuries. I find it very alarming that they are pushing hepatitis B, which is a vaccine for a sexually transmitted disease, to newborns on their first day of life. It just doesn't seem in a risk category. We routinely screen women in prenatal care for hepatitis B. There are no unknowns anymore. And it's just interesting to see that that would be the vaccine they would push in the first 12 hours of life. That vaccine by itself has tremendously more aluminum than the EPA considers to be a safe amount. And the hepatitis B that your newborn gets in the first 12 hours of life is the same hepatitis B that you get as an adult. So that's something to consider also. In terms of the conspiracy aspect, I was not a part of those conversations. I did not make those laws. I cannot attest to a conspiracy, but I can say it becomes very difficult to believe that they don't understand exactly what they're doing when you begin to read the trial data and you really begin to understand how the system works and how deep the regulatory capture issue really goes. Did that answer your question?
Certainly, and that also goes to the point where Anthony Fauci was sitting in Congress telling Congress that the members of that regulatory community, the folks working in the agencies, are getting paid royalties by the pharmaceutical companies that are injecting people with these untested chemicals, these untested treatments.
Right.
And he would not tell them how much they were getting paid or who was getting paid because he had some legal protection that prevented him from having to do that. He wasn't compelled to do so. Yeah. So, this is a very intricate, very well-established, and very profitable.
It is an extremely profitable and heavily entrenched system. Even ACIP, the American Council on Immunization Practices, and the VRBPAC, the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Board that determine our recommended schedule in vaccines, every single one of those members is on the pharmaceutical drug payroll, and every year they resolve this by giving themselves permission to have a conflict of interest. They all agree, oh, well, that's fine, and they carry on, and the person who gets hurt is the vaccine recipient themselves, and that is wholly unacceptable.
Well, Carrie, I want to ask you a question. So we talked about, you're talking about regulatory capture at the federal level. And again, I always try to bring the conversation back to the local level. And, I always like to give the idea, can you imagine, you have these bureaucrats at the federal level, it's now creeped down into the local level. And in Fort Bend County, KP George and that crew over there, they are the best drug pushers in the state of Texas. They deal more drugs than any other cartel in the state of Texas. They got more people vaccinated per capita in Fort Bend County, or I should say poisoned, in Fort Bend County than any other county in the state of Texas. And what I always say, that's a force for dark. Okay, could you imagine if they were a force for good? Could you imagine if rather than that they were bringing the facts that you're bringing and asking the questions, why aren't these vaccine manufacturers? Why don't they have liability and things of that sort? Do you see any? What is your opinion of what happened at the local level?
At the local level, it's deplorable. The infringement upon civil liberties can't be really understated. From the mask mandates to the vaccine mandates to all of a sudden HIPAA went away and everybody wanted to know your personal private medical information to enter Walmart. There was a huge egregious, and there was a massive push and an absolute push of the falsehood that getting this vaccine would have a public health benefit. Everyone involved, including the manufacturers, all the way down to the local level, they never even tested to see if it would prevent transmission or infection. So there was no possible way that they could have ever, honestly made that claim. That was a marketing gimmick. And so they misled people to get this intervention that had a lot of harm and completely new technology that had never been done before. And in all of the trials in the previous 2 decades prior to its release, were abject, total failures that led to massive destruction of all the participants in the trials.
The other thing is that they put our police in harm's way because when they're violating HIPAA laws, they were also violating rights by requiring people to wear masks. And they had police officers enforcing something that was not a law. And again, that is the totalitarian creep in inches, because they had the police telling you to put a mask on when police can only enforce laws. That's not a law. That's a county dictate. And they're hanging the police out to dry because the police could have gotten in serious legal jeopardy personally by doing that. Yep. But ultimately, if people want to know where the county wanted to go, they wanted to get the police. If you could go find on BitChute's a website that does videos. And on that site, there are videos of Australian county police officers holding down, ripping a boy from a father's arms and holding it down, a baby, and jacking it up with that supposed vaccine, poison, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. That's ultimately where our county officials wanted to go to. They were doing the drip of totalitarianism until they get us to a flood.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get to that Australian model.
Yeah. There absolutely was a push to have that. And that threat is still there. I don't believe that they're going to stop trying to create crises because, they have those, emergency powers that they give themselves. The pullback of the Chevron doctrine has helped tremendously with that regard. But still, the push to comply is very strong. And as a vaccine recipient, it's just really important to understand that you own all the legal and physical risk and that they are not required to disclose that risk to you. So you need to be skeptical with any medical intervention in which you own all the risk and they don't have to tell you what that risk is.
There's a bright side to everything, and the bright side is that I think that they've awakened the sleeping giant. I think
Agreed.
they've awakened the everyday average American citizen, and I think we're finding that patriotism come back to ourselves, and I think we're finding the spirit of 1776, or here in Texas, the spirit of 1836. And from a political perspective, we're doing the activism we need to take back our country. Mm-hmm. I think that is happening. And Carrie, one of the good things that came from it is, tell us about the change in direction in your life. I don't know if I know you at one point had a very successful career that you stepped away from to be an activist. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, well, I've been a casual medical liberty advocate for over 2 decades in multiple different states, but I was a mental health professional in private practice and had been that way for well over a decade. And I volunteered for Texans for Vaccine Choice, and I decided I'm going to build these people a grassroots army, and I have been diligently doing that ever since. I don't miss my former life very much. I'm quite happy to be doing the work that I know needs to be done to safeguard the future for my children. And all of our children, really. They don't get to dictate what medical interventions we take, and they definitely don't get to stick us with all the liability and remove our choice from us.
Americans, you should never, ever allow them to place masks or any other little deceitful tactic on our children. They're slowly taking away the autonomy of the child from the parent to the state. And, and that's just one small example of it. And so I'm really glad that people like Carrie are fighting the good fight. Carrie, can you tell us what Texans for Vaccine Choice is all about?
Yeah, Texans for Vaccine Choice has been around since 2015. We're here to advance and protect your medical liberty rights, which are informed consent, medical privacy, and vaccine choice. It began when there was a bill introduced in the Texas House that would have eliminated all exemptions for school-age children. Some moms got together and said no, and TFVC was born. Since that time, we have killed every bill that would have eliminated or minimized your medical liberty rights, and we have also passed lots of legislation. Last year alone, we had 5 pieces of protective legislation pass. Very incredible.
That is incredible. I think that we're at the beginning. We're seeing the tip of the iceberg for a new country, a new day for liberty in America. And I hope all Americans want to be a part of it. So one of the things that you mentioned to me before coming on the show is and this is a very timely question because school's going to start in 1 week. But can you tell us about back to school vaccine exemptions?
Yeah, a lot of school districts will tell you that shots are required to enroll for school, and that is not true. You have exemptions available here in Texas. We have 2 types of exemptions that are available. We have an affidavit of conscientious belief exemption, which is the philosophical and religious rolled into one. You order that form, turn it into your school. It's good for 2 years. We have a medical exemption that is done with your doctor. Your doctor writes a letter that's submitted to your school. That's good for 1 year. There's no such thing as required vaccine in Texas. If you have a public K through 12 school, they must accept the exemption. If you are in a private or public licensed preschool or daycare, they must accept the exemption. If you are in any kind of after high school, vocational, trade school, 2-year, 4-year school, they also must accept the exemption. The only ability that a school has to dictate your vaccination choices is if they are a 100% privately funded school, which means they take no money from the state. They are allowed to make their own exemption policy, but that is less than 1% of the schools in Texas. You have excellent exemption rights in Texas, and Texans for Vaccine Choice is going to make sure that those continue.
Can you tell me that one hair of a percent of the schools that don't have to?
A 100% privately funded K through 12 school that receives not even $1 of state education money, they can create their own immunization policy.
And does that include, for example, Catholic private schools?
Yes, Catholic schools actually are one of the ones that we get called on the most for not accepting exemptions at all. So they won't allow that. So if you're considering a private school for your child, make sure that you ask about their exemption policy and make sure that it aligns with you, because sometimes there are issues with getting your child enrolled if you are not up to date on a school that does not allow exemptions and is privately funded and therefore free to have that policy.
Do you have any idea why Catholic schools all have a vaccine requirement? Almost everyone I've looked at has it. Do you have any idea why they do that?
I'm not Catholic. I know that the Pope has said that he thinks that even though aborted fetal cells are involved in the vaccination process, that it's for the greater good. So I think it's coming down from the top. But again, I'm not a Catholic. I can't speak for the Catholic Church. But I do know that that is something that the Pope has said. And I do know that there are lots of issues with the Catholic schools.
The Pope said that the Pope acknowledged that there are aborted fetal cells in the vaccines.
It's a known and acknowledged. I mean, they're cultured. There are multiple vaccines that are cultured on aborted fetal cells. And I think it was Pope Benedict maybe who had said that it was for the greater good. I can't remember the exact source right now, but yes.
You know, there are some conspiracy theories out there about tissues and fluids that come from abortions that are used in different rituals and practices. And and the idea is that they put it into, like, I've heard that it's in some of our drinks that we drink, in some of our foods that we eat, and of course now they put it in this quote unquote medicines that's a vaccine. And the idea is what they're doing is they are they're getting us to accept essentially just a more cruel world for infants and for babies and for fetuses. And there's a concept that they're just trying to get us to normalize it.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard that. I can't speak to that exactly, but I do know that they are absolutely used as a culture medium for multiple vaccines that are currently on this schedule, and that the process of the harvesting of those aborted fetal tissues is really brutal because they are chosen ahead of time. It is a live baby when they take the cells because it must be a living culture. The grandfather of vaccinology is a gentleman named Stanley Plotkin. He literally wrote a book called Plotkin on Vaccines, and he was deposed for 9 hours talking about the process of the aborted fetal tissue harvesting and also the lack of testing for the vaccines in the schedule. So if you want to dive deeper into really understanding how those tissues are collected and what that looks like, that would be a wonderful thing to get evidence-based information from the man himself who pioneered that technique.
I think we need to consider the idea, the perspective that the people that are pushing this agenda are truly evil at their core. I think that Americans they are hesitant to pass judgment, and I completely understand that. But I think we're beyond that point when we're with the discussion that we're having here, exposing all these truths. Because again, I'd like to remind everybody that it was a former governor of Virginia, that trial ballooned the idea of post-birth abortions.
Yeah.
So I think that really shows their intent that, these people come here, they say, hey, put the mask on for your own good. And then, well, we just want a little vaccine. It's optional. And then over in Australia, they're ripping children from parents' arms, holding the kid down and vaccinating it. And the kids are getting injured. And, there's not much good coming from the Democrat Party right now.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to all the things that they're doing in the world, but I do know that with the vaccines in particular, the process of getting the aborted fetal tissue is awful. I mean, those babies were alive. I've heard people say before that it didn't matter because those babies were aborted, but the reality is they have to be aborted alive in what's called a water bag abortion, where they're taken out with the amniotic fluid and everything's still intact, because the way you get a living cell culture, it's from a living cell. If the baby had already, passed in the abortion process, then it would be a dead cell and no longer able to be a culture medium. It must be a live cell. So those children are alive when they are aborted in their water bag, and they are segmented and used in perpetuity.
It certainly gives rise to some of the greater, more dark conspiracy theories that are out there.
It's definitely important to be aware as a recipient that that's going in your body. And there's no real way to get rid of all the residual DNA that's in that. So that's another concern that people may want to think of beyond just the ethical implications of such a process.
Well, for me and my family, of course, we didn't know the implications of vaccines.
Because they didn't have to disclose it to you.
Yeah. And the other thing is that the medical professionals, when the baby is birthed, they get that baby out of there real quick to go jack it up with those 78 injections. And as a result of that, one of my my oldest child, we didn't know any of this stuff. So before we knew it, my son was vaccinated.
Yeah.
And then he regularly would get sick, and now he has diabetes. And I like how the medical professionals always put it back on you. It's a tactic. Does your family have a medical history of diabetes? They're always pointing the finger at you. And the truth is, we need to point the finger at them. No, does your vaccine give diabetes to kids? Because my gut instinct, since he got that from the vaccine. What do you think?
Well, I think it's definitely a known adverse event that has been listed. I mean, I can't speak to your child's individual health, but it is important to recognize that you have to decide whether you're willing to accept that risk or not, and that they don't have to tell you what that risk entails. You can always choose to vaccinate later. When I meet new parents, I always encourage them, wait until you know why you're saying yes or why you're saying no. Because one of the big gaslighting tactics for gaslighting, vaccine-injured parents, whose children have been injured, is, they vaccinate on the first day of life in the United States of America, first 12 hours. You don't really have a baseline on that child, so you don't really know what's happening with them. And when you begin vaccinating on the first day of life, you will never know if it would have happened anyway or if it was a result of the vaccine. And that guilt can be really destructive to a lot of families as that goes through, the process there of that child being injured. So, hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted disease. You can always wait until they're older to consider getting that vaccine if you feel like that's a risk category for you. But just be advised that once you begin vaccinating, your baseline of your child's normal is altered.
I support our medical community.
Me too.
But I think that there needs to be a little bit of pushback because they have a profit motive too. And they went down this road of pushing these vaccines with full momentum. And now some of these executives and the hospitals, whoever the administrators of the hospitals are building beautiful mansions in the most expensive suburbs.
Yes.
And I think it's time to push back. I have a friend, and he's getting, asking for over the counter medicine from the pharmacist, and the pharmacist asks the question, "And did you get your vaccine?" Right? And of course, that's proactive selling. That's closing the deal.
Absolutely.
And that's what they're doing, in pretending to be just a caring medical professional. No, they're making their number.
Well, and in their defense, it's not always just the medical practitioner. A lot of time that's coming from the insurance company themselves, the bureaucratic arm of the medical industry, not necessarily the providers. Now what's happening with providers is originally they were getting rewarded through a bonus structure if they had a 63% or higher vaccine compliance on schedule. And then that wasn't enough to scare the doctors off from informed consent. So then it became, everything that you billed our office would be at the lowest tier if you didn't meet that. So that was hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost income. And even that wasn't enough to stop the process of informed consent from those providers who really were ethical providers. There are so many ethical providers. I want to be very clear. There are so many ethical providers out there, but they are being dropped by their insurance companies for not meeting that threshold. So there absolutely is a push, but I don't know if it's even that individual person or if it's a bigger, larger bureaucratic issue.
Yeah, I mean, they've built the system. They've stacked the cards against us.
Absolutely, 100%, which is why you need to make sure you never, ever, ever lose your voice.
And so what this person did when the pharmacist would ask him these, closing the deal type of questions, he started to bullet point, to speak back to her with facts about the vaccine, and that conversation ended in a minute.
That's me.
and I think it needs to happen. The longer that we are sheep, the longer that we're just docile sheep, the more that this stuff happens. You have to bully a bully, and you have to stand up to this supposed authority. And that's really the only, in a peaceful but a political way.
Yeah, it's important to know what your rights are so that you can assert them. And again, just keep in mind that you, the vaccine recipient, own all the liability and the legal and physical risk. So whenever that's true, like you would never trust a car seat or a car or a tire that had a safety thing that was never tested. There are recalls because mistakes happen, and those companies try and avoid those recalls because it costs them money. And it's important to recognize that with vaccines, it's unique in the sense that that doesn't happen. You, the recipient, own 100% of the risk. And you should get to have 100% of the choice.
I don't know. I read this somewhere, but I read that the first. I have a feeling that these methods reach back to the foundation of our country, because what I read is that one of the first cases of breast cancer was Abigail Adams' daughter, John Adams, right from 1776. His wife was Abigail, and they had a daughter. She died of breast cancer. Supposedly, that was the first case of breast cancer. I don't know if this is true, but this is what I understand. And Abigail Adams herself was one of the very first people to get vaccinated. Of course, that's way back history. I don't know if you have a comment on that, but
well, the process of vaccination has changed dramatically since those days. Back in those days, they were basically taking cowpox, the pustules, and smearing it and injecting that directly into the body, which had, I'm sure, all kinds of unintended consequences. But it's important to recognize that we don't fully understand how the immune system works. And so the idea of tampering is a risk, and it does have risk inherent in that process. And so it's important that you, as a recipient, understand why you're saying yes or why you're saying no, and to make sure that you can say yes or no free of coercion.
So I know one of the things that you're very excited to tell us about is your new parent informed consent bundle. This is exciting.
Yes.
What is this?
So it's a gift bundle that we created to help fill a need. One of the things that I hear most often as outreach director, that my team reflects back to me also in the community, is that people don't know how to have the talk with their newly pregnant friends about vaccine choice. They're very concerned about having a confrontation because medical liberty in general is a polarized, politicized, and emotionally driven topic. So TFVC, ever so helpful, created a gift bundle to help you do that. You can order on our website, TexansForVaccineChoice.com. It comes with everything a new parent needs to have a true informed consent process in a non-biased, evidence-based way. It comes with a cute little onesie, an adorable children's book. It comes with a folder of all the information you need and an informed consent flowchart to walk you through the process so that you understand why you're saying yes or why you're saying no. And it also gives you a legal primer on what your legal rights are in terms of exemptions so that you don't get pushed around by someone who thinks that you don't know what your rights are.
That is excellent. When did you introduce that, and to what extent is it getting out there?
When did I introduce it? I want to say over maybe a year ago, maybe somewhere, and I have to really look. It's been a blur. But it's a very popular product. It's economical. Not only do you get to help resource your friend, but you get to help support our mission of, spreading this cause throughout the land. And also, a great thing about this gift bundle is if you want to, you can send it anonymously. When you send it anonymously, they get a beautiful handwritten card that says someone who loves you is giving you the gift of informed consent. So they don't have to know where it came from, but the information comes, and the feedback from the community that receives these bundles is that it comes wrapped in love, cloaked in truth, and they are allowed to make the decision that they want in a non-judgmental space.
So, does it list in that packet, does it list the amount of injections that are put into the infant?
It does. I mean, on the first day of life, in the 2024 schedule, they have increased the vaccines that they give at birth. It used to just be hepatitis B and vitamin K that they would give, and now they want to do RSV, hepatitis B, and vitamin K. And the RSV is a monoclonal antibody, so that is a brand new product that has not yet been tested. Hepatitis B already, I don't know too many newborns that are engaging in either promiscuous behavior with infected partners or IV drug sharing. So I'm not really sure why hepatitis B is there for the newborns. But yes, they are just continuing to up the dosages on the first day of life.
So on the first, I think it's a very interesting thought exercise. I would like just for every person listening, as a fully grown adult, to imagine. Even if it's about 10 injections right there, maybe, right? Maybe 10 on the first day of life.
On the first day of life, they give you hepatitis B, which is a single strain of hepatitis B, vitamin K, which isn't a vaccine but does have aluminum as a preservative, and then RSV, which is respiratory syncytial virus. So they give 2 vaccines on the first day of life. At the 2-month appointment, that's what you're thinking of, where they do 8 doses of vaccines for an 8-week-old, and then they repeat that on 6 months of age and 9 months of age and 12 months of age.
I mean, you're not putting 8 needles of anything in me. If you laid 8 needles down, I don't care if you put them full of water, you lay them on a table, I get nervous seeing 8 needles
You know what the
intending to go
solution
into
to
my
that
skin.
was? That's why they moved to intercombinant shots. Is people were getting freaked out by the number of monovalent individual vaccines that they began to do intercombinant, which is where they have, you know, the DTaP. So DTaP isn't just tetanus; it's diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis. So it's 3 different vaccines in one. MMR is measles, mumps, and rubella. So again, there are a lot of them dosed together. We have hexavalent, pentavalent, you know, 6 in 1, 5 in 1. And they keep increasing that. And the interesting thing, the important thing to understand as a vaccine recipient is that those are all tested individually, but they're dosed intercombinantly. So we don't actually know about the potentiality of synergistic toxicity for the vaccine recipients because there just isn't any data out there.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. I mean,
It is,
you know, again, here as an adult, I would absolutely reject all of this stuff. But they're infants. They can't even think for themselves
They
yet.
trust us to advocate for them.
And they are guinea pigs.
Yes.
They're there are test case guinea pigs. But I have a feeling that, I mean, I know you're having a lot of success with your organization.
Indeed.
And can you just tell us what kind of tips would you give for outreach for other citizens to do the same sort of thing that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm outreach director, so I get to spend a lot of time in the community, and I get to have the wonderful responsibility of helping to train our volunteers. And it's important to remember that outreach at its core is a cooperative activity whose primary goal is connection. So it's important to be mindful that your partner has their own feelings, their own thoughts, and to respect those thoughts and feelings. Our 4 steps of primary outreach are prepare. Get yourself ready in the headspace to really focus on this person, allow them to take the forefront. You connect, where you connect with them, get the rapport, have their willingness to hear it from you. You inform them very specifically on one particular fact that is evidence-based and objective reality. Your opinion, thoughts, or choices may be useful, but they're not advocacy points. So you want to keep it on an objective reality point. And then the 4th and very important step is you allow. And when you're approaching someone, you know, people are hardwired to communicate through all of their senses. So when you're talking to someone, you want to be mindful of how your tone of voice is, what your body expression, you know, facial expressions and body language looks like, because all of those nonverbal cues let your partner know whether you're there to help them or whether you're there to dominate them. And so it's important to be mindful of those things when you're talking to them, because they really do shift how the conversation is received. I mean, only 7% of the interpreted meaning in a verbal interaction from humans is the words.
You know, I think another very important you know, thing about your movement is, I was in the, I had an accident. I was playing a sport and I busted my head open and I had to get 7 staples in my head.
Oh, fun.
And when I did that, they wanted to give me a tetanus shot.
Yeah.
And they wanted to give me a painkiller. I let them do that because it hurt so bad.
Fair.
But they wanted to give me a tetanus. And
why?
And my point being is that you don't know what is what anymore. You don't know what to trust. And so I called my wife and she said, "Do not get it." But
Yeah.
that's what we're losing our faith and our confidence in our medical system because we don't know what's the truth and what's not.
One of the biggest casualties has been trust in public health and safety. And I am concerned that now, if we really did have an emergency that really did require us to make hard choices regarding, you know, transmission and quarantine and all of those things, that nobody would take it seriously now because they've broken our trust so thoroughly. And that is a massive and huge problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this has been a really good hour, Carrie. I really appreciate your time.
Wow, that was fast. Time flies when you're having fun.
It does.
Yes.
Is there anything that you'd like to share with us just to finish off?
We are a true grassroots organization who is absolutely committed to helping you discover your voice and letting you spread that through the community. If you have any interest in volunteering, please go to our website, TexansForVaccineChoice.com. We have real and phenomenal training to help you really be a good part of the movement and be an effective advocate. If you would like to participate in our legislative updates, definitely sign up for our newsletter. We don't spam you or sell you, but we definitely educate and empower you, and we'll keep you up to date as the legislative session starts in 2025 so that we can make sure that we continue to have an excellent record legislatively to keep our laws safe as they should be. And also, we are a grassroots and donor-funded organization. So if you don't have a heart to volunteer, but you do have a heart to help, please consider making a donation today. All of that really does go to fund the work that's done in Texas.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I'd also like to share with the audience that this is Chris Heasley with The Chris Heasley Show, and I do appreciate everybody listening in. And please, everyone, remember that you can find a rebroadcast of the show on Radio DeBang 99.5's Facebook page and their YouTube page, so long as we are not censored, because we do tend to be politically incorrect and break the rules of the establishment of our supposed overlords. We like to take those guys on. So, but that's it. And I do appreciate your time, Carrie, and thank you very much, everybody. And please, the show time now is Tuesday nights at 7. We're now prime time. So we look forward to seeing you next week.